So one thing that you might come across when you're reading literature about sourdough bread or bread in general is the crumb. So the crumb can tell you a little bit about your bread, and some people work really hard to achieve a certain kind of crumb. So you have a range of crumb. At the one end of the range, you have a very open crumb, and some people refer to this as bread lace. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the tight crumb or the closed crumb, and that would mean your bread looks very even and there are not large holes or air pockets. My bread here has the crumb is a little bit similar. This is probably my most open crumb along with this, and then this is just a slightly tighter crumb. So the way that you're going to achieve a much more open crumb, first of all, it's very easy to do, or it's much easier to do, I should say, if you're using white flours. White flours have more gluten as a percentage of their weight, and they don't have the bran that is cutting those gluten strands. Whereas if you're using whole grain flours, those are going to have bran and they're going to have less gluten because of the bran displacing it. And you're going to have a much more difficult time achieving an open crumb. That doesn't mean you can't achieve an open crumb with using whole grain flours. It just means it's a little more challenging. So my breads here are all 50% whole grain, and I'm really happy with this crumb. If I were to get too much of an open crumb, of course, it makes it hard for the bread to hold butter and cheese and all those delicious things that you're going to want to put on your bread. So one of the ways that you preserve an open crumb is when you get ready, you're finishing up your bulk ferment and you divide your dough if you're using more than one loaf. And you want to do that very, very carefully. You don't want to disturb those air pockets, and you just want to preserve as much of those gases in the dough as you can. So you're going to carefully divide your dough. You're going to really carefully form your loaves and put them in the proofing basket. And that's one way that you can achieve a more open crumb. If you're really after a tight crumb, one of the techniques that you can use is to punch down your dough in between the bulk ferment and the shaping and final proofing. So if you get rid of those air bubbles, that's going to help you achieve a tighter crumb if that's your goal. This is a fairly tight crumb or a closed crumb. I've made bread that is even more closed crumb, but it's a pretty nice texture for making sandwiches and for making toast and for making grilled sandwiches. So I'm really happy with this. It seems to be very fashionable to create bread with an open crumb, and I think it's a really fun thing to kind of experiment with and see how far you can push it. I hope that you'll experiment and decide what kind of crumb you want, or maybe you want to try different crumbs and have fun trying to achieve those goals. That's one of the fun things about sourdough, is to get a variety of different crumbs and to be able to learn how to manipulate that a little bit. So I hope you'll enjoy.